Hey guys, Kuja here with Exerscribe TV, and today I want to talk to you guys about mycotoxins. So what are mycotoxins? Well, mycotoxins are derived from mold. And what we're going to talk about today are really, how they all started and why mycotoxins today are so bad for you. Well, in the past, obviously mycotoxins existed as we fermented certain foods like sauerkraut and even today's kombucha. So they do have potential health benefits, or they did. But what has happened in, over the years, specifically in 1964, the Stauffer Chemical Company invented a product called Roundup, and the chemical ingredient used in that pesticide, the active ingredient, is known as a glyphosate. And glyphosates have been kind of known to be in the increase in the last 10 years in usage. So a lot of what we're seeing is more intestinal issues, and more people blaming things like gluten when it could be, most likely, the increase of glyphosate used in pesticides. So that's where it all really began. In 1964, these glyphosates were being used and damaging the soil. Well, if you think about the soil and the plants, they have the same type of balance that's required, just like our gut flora. Our body produces more probiotics to create balance for the body to have optimal function. Well, plants and soil are kind of the same way. So when the soil doesn't have proper balance, when the soil isn't healthy, well, then that creates a multitude of problems, beginning with a mycotoxin known as Fusarium. So Fusarium is a type of mycotoxin, a mold that is broken down into three main categories. The first one is fumonisin, trichothecenes, and zearalenone. So the first one, they have two main types. You have B1 and B2. And the thing about the B1 version of this is that it can affect you with as little as 1 microgram. That's 1,000th of a milligram in terms of dosage. So if there's only even a small fraction in your food, it can affect your health. And it's mainly found in corn. So if you think about all the processed foods that we eat, most of those have some type of corn, especially GMO corn. And so if you're having processed foods, 9 times out of 10, you're getting this type of mycotoxin in your bloodstream, in your diet. The second one is trichothecenes, and these ones are typically used in grains. So, if you're drinking any beer or wine, you're probably getting the trichothecenes. And the thing about beer specifically, and we'll talk about this more about why you want to avoid it, is that the grains that they won't even feed to the animal, even the bad grains that they feed to grain-fed cattle, they won't feed these certain grains, but they end up using it to ferment and create beer. So when you think about the worst types of most molded grains that they're using those for beer production, especially the low-end stuff. And the last one is the zearalenone. These ones are potent xenoestrogens or xenohormones. And what that means is that they act by imitating hormones, specifically estrogen. So cattle ranchers will typically use this one specifically to help beef up cattle and help them produce more milk. And that's a big problem in terms of its effect on obesity, on cancer, and infertility. Dave Asprey, in his video on mycotoxins, he made a good point about how it's interesting how in our society, in America, we have this big infertility problem, but in third world countries, they clearly don't. And a lot of it is most likely because of the way that we're processing food and the type of pesticides that we're using and how we talked about this whole ecosystem is all out of balance. So going back to what types of food to avoid, number one, beer and wine, definitely. Wine is also usually not good for you in terms of mycotoxin toxicity because of the fact that the grapes come from toxic soil that has the glyphosates and most likely a chemical imbalance. So those are likely to have mycotoxins in them, and then they take that and ferment it, obviously, into the wine that we drink. Number two, coffee and cocoa. The beans, if they're chipped and cracked during the process, then as they're being processed and dried, they grow the mold, and that creates mycotoxins. And over 90% of North American coffee has mycotoxins in it. And that's why you've seen me before. I talk about the bulletproof coffee, and I'll include a link here for you to check that out. That's the best type of coffee to use is a wet processed coffee because those beans go through a certain process that avoids the mold, and they're even picked in a specific way. Next, you want to avoid blemished fruit and even black bananas. Even though it seems like that it would be counterintuitive and some things will say that those things are healthy, you want to avoid those when it comes to feeding these mycotoxins and mold production. Another thing you want to avoid is cured meats. Cured meats during the curing process creates mycotoxins. Only go for grass-fed meats and wild-caught fish. If they're grain-fed, they're being fed grains most likely from mycotoxin-filled grains. And same with farm fish. Most fish that you see out there that you buy in the store, if it doesn't say wild-caught on there, it's most likely farmed, and they feed the salmon and the farmed fish, they feed them grains. And those are cheap, low-quality corn, GMO-based grains. And then lastly, you don't want to have any eggs unless they're from range-fed chickens, because chickens are naturally supposed to eat bugs and worms and things, but in most farms these chickens are eating GMO corn and a lot of these grains that are filled with mycotoxins, so you definitely don't want to eat those eggs. So there you have it. There's a brief kind of summary on mycotoxins. For a further in-depth analysis of mycotoxins, check out our blog, exerscribe.com/blog, and you'll see our 3-part series on mycotoxins. Thanks for tuning in today. See you next time on Exerscribe TV.